Welcome aboard, folks. I'm Stephen Malkowich, your captain on this adventure called Ship of Fools. I'm a fool. Lucky for you, I'm not sailing solo. Join me and a boatload of people, all just trying to make sense of this crazy world. It's a fabulous mess, and you're invited.
I'd like to welcome everybody to Ship of Fools, where wit meets wisdom. And today we have a special guest, Ryan Mitton, who is the Director of Legislative Affairs for, Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Welcome to Ship of Fools, where wit meets wisdom, Ryan.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much. So we'll get right into it here. You were so gracious to accept my invitation to come on a few weeks ago. And I'd just like to get a little background about you. And then we can get into the meat of things about the Canadian Federation for Independent Business, what they do, okay? Because I just recently found out about the organization, and I've been in business for a long time and didn't know you guys existed. So over to you.
Yeah, well, I'll start with where I am today. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business here in British Columbia. And largely, my job is to represent the interests of small businesses to the provincial municipal governments. We also have a national team in Ottawa that does a lot of work there in pushing for important policies and, making Canada the best place to do business. A lot of work to be done on that front, of course. But, how did I get here? I like to think I've been an advocate my whole life. I think back to high school debate club and, my friend Sam Harris and I, we were, often on the debate team, and they'd call us, the reverend and the lawyer. And I would be doing the sermons and he would be doing the incisive deconstruction of our opponent's arguments. And I think advocacy, I've always enjoyed that kind of the cut and thrust of debate. I've always enjoyed arguing for ideas I care about. And that took me through my education, McGill University, did a history and political science there. And then after not getting into law school, I decided to pursue a master's and took myself over to England, London School of Economics. And that's where I fell in love again with economics, actually. I'm sure for some of you listening out there, we've all done our introduction to microeconomics and macroeconomics. And I think just the circumstances at the time, I wasn't too into charting graphs, and that kind of scared me off. But having, rediscovered, I think, the big principal truth that economics is more than just charts. It's actually about people and how people behave, how we make decisions or how we make bad decisions sometimes. That was a huge part of my academic upbringing. And so that's where I did my master's in public management and governance over at LSE in England. And then I came back here. I began working for the provincial government as an administrative assistant in the minister's office. And after the government fell in 2017, I worked as a legislative assistant and then a researcher for the official opposition for 8 years. And then I joined CFIB. And that was a great organization to come to. I worked on, as I mentioned, economic small business files a lot at the legislature, and it seemed like a very natural transition for me to fight for small business.
This is an organization, Ryan, that I came to my attention about a month and a half ago. And the wonderful thing about this podcast is that the Ship of Fools, where wit meets wisdom, I get to embrace my curiosity. So when somebody tells me or somebody brings something to my attention, I can get them on here and we can have a conversation. And ergo, you so graciously accepted the invitation, and I thank you for that. But having said that, tell us what CFIB is in Canada, and then we can get down to the provincial level. Because I didn't know anything, and our listeners, our viewers, probably, maybe some of them do, some of them don't. So tell us about CFIB.
Well, CFIB has been around since 1971 when it was founded by John Bullock, our founder. But really, it truly began in 1969 as part of a tax protest. And what had happened at the time is the E.J. Benson White Paper, the finance minister under the Trudeau government, the elder Trudeau government, proposed some pretty substantive tax reforms. And what this would have done is increase the small business corporate tax rate by nearly 50%. And provided some pretty charitable tax breaks to larger businesses. So John Bullock, as the legend goes, was sitting in his bathtub reading the white paper, as you do, and saw this proposal and was instantly, events were set in motion. He formed the Canadian Committee for Fair Taxation And that tax protest ultimately forced the government to walk back these changes that would have devastated small businesses in Canada. From there, 1971, CFIB was founded in order to represent the interests of small businesses, nonpartisan organization. We don't take government money as a matter of principle, and we are governed one member, one vote. So each business gets a vote. We do that through research surveys to ask important political questions. And those views are what form our mandate. So I get my mandate on what I advocate to the government for from our members. When they say this is what we want, we get a majority opinion through a survey. And then we take that to government. We use that data not only to tell them what businesses want, but to also inform them how they're doing. We have a regular product called the Monthly Business Barometer, and this is a long-standing measure we've been doing since the early 2000s that tracks on a monthly basis how healthy small businesses are, how confident they are in their future. So we measure short and long-term confidence, and that's been tracked for a long time. So that's just an example of some of the things we do.
People don't, because we were talking before we started to record here, I grew up in a family of small business. It was integral. It was integral to the economy. It was integral to, it is. And people, I'm not going to say, because I don't want to tar everybody with the same brush, but small to medium-sized businesses are the lifeblood of this country.
They are.
And that's it. And without that, we don't have any economic engine aside from, we've got our natural resources kind of thing, but they're responsible for, I don't know what percentage of our GDP or what we're producing, but small to medium-sized businesses are integral. And we have, and because of my background in the newspaper business, that's what we survived on.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about. We've talked about a little bit about the origins of the CFIB, but you play a big role in advocating with the provincial government here, which I believe right now is very, very important.
Yes. Oh, we have a big fight on our hands right now. Just weeks ago, all business organizations pretty much in BC stood together and called out the provincial government for some of the devastating tax changes that they're going to be pushing on small businesses. And well, just to get the point across here, you spoke about the breadth and the foundation that small businesses provide to this province. 98% of all businesses in BC are small businesses, just to give you an idea of how instrumental they are to our economy. And that's why, when we look at the challenges that we're facing with some of the budget, the deficit, the tax changes that are being forced upon small businesses by government, that's why it's so critical that we're able to speak with one voice as a business community and, deliver a strong message to government about the direction that things are headed.
Well, the budget was, we'll release this probably, it will come out I'll say probably in the next couple of weeks at the end of March. But the budget was released, how long ago?
February 17th.
February 17th. And that was a real shitty budget. Just to be blunt about it. That was not even pretend. And to have a gleeful, I don't know how you sell that.
I think it went over like a lead balloon. I was, something we do as an organization is we're, invited to the budget lockup by the government, and you sit there with other stakeholder organizations and you review the budget materials. So you get them in advance, right? Because they have to release them after markets close. It's market moving information. So you get they take away your cell phone. Yep. You're sitting there and you're poring over all the financial information, and you could sort of feel the temperature in the room just start to go downhill from the moment everyone cracked open the books. And no, I don't think anyone was happy. And I do mean anyone, because I saw some people from, say, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, which I would say has a different sort of viewpoint on some things than we might when it comes to certain policies like taxation. Even they weren't happy with it. It really managed to please nobody. And, Mark Lee, who I spoke to, said as such, right, is just to recap, I guess, for your listeners, what was in that. It was a massive suite of tax changes. Let's start with the PST. It's a 7% sales tax, as we know, but they've expanded it now to professional services. If you're a small business, cracking open this budget, I was astonished. I was blown away. It's like, okay, accounting and bookkeeping services, the number one thing you need if you're a small business is your accounting. You've got to have your numbers straight. Tax on that. If you're a restaurant and you needed to hire a security guard to prevent your windows from getting smashed, as many restaurants have now, 7% tax on that. Let's not even get into the architectural engineering and geoscience services, which, if you're in construction, you're trying to build something, maybe you are an architecture business, or you're an interior designer that that is co-located in an architectural firm. Like these businesses are going to be impacted. And that's just one tax. There were 4 major tax increases.
But walk us through I just want to continue on.
Yeah.
It's insane. Go ahead, walk us through.
Okay. So the PST, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what it's on.
So accounting and bookkeeping services, commercial property management services. So that's, your commercial strata management and rental management services. That's commissions on commercial real estate. You also have, security and private investigation services, AEG, which is architectural engineering and geoscience services. And small caveat here, they're only applying it to 30% of the value of the services, but that's still okay, great asterisk there, I suppose. Mm-hmm. It's still a big blow to anyone trying to build anything in this province. And let's be clear, the PST is a very poorly designed tax. Let's take away the financial component for a second here. The paperwork alone is huge.
The onus on the small business.
You have to register and
That's
collect, right?
Yes.
And I'm, the confusion of how this applies. Say you get your accounting done in, Calgary, just by virtue you're in a border community, you're getting those services. There's going to be a lack of clarity about whether the PST applies there. If your accountant in Alberta, say, you get those services there, doesn't charge you the PST, you've got to self-declare it, right? Because you've as a BC business, you've purchased those services. Mm-hmm. So I am concerned that some small businesses may, think they're getting a 7% discount on their services, and then they're going to be hit with an audit and a tax bill down the line. We need to make sure, that surprise isn't happening either. But, when we CFIB, we advocate against red tape is another thing we do. Obviously, we want good, strong financial policies for business. Red tape advocacy is another big pillar of our advocacy. And when we ask small businesses, what are the biggest sources of red tape? Well, aside from, provincial labor standards, WorkSafe BC, for example, it's also the paperwork associated with PST compliance. That is like the number 2 item when it comes to paperwork. And you can, if you don't believe me, you can go online, look at the PST bulletins on the BC government website. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages of work that you need to do to comply and understand what is and is not taxed. So now we're expanding that to, the essential professional services that BC businesses rely on. And you're supposed to be a small business in this province to say, oh, hey, this is, this is good. No.
At a time where we should be doing the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Like making it, we were talking about this before we started recording, is that this is a very difficult province to do business in. And the provincial government, this budget just exemplifies that. Creating more work for a small business, for small to medium-sized businesses that are like operating on a razor thin margin. Like it's
razor thin.
And I don't know any, I haven't been to a Canucks game for a while, but I imagine they're charging like $22 or something like that for a beer now. Everything is so expensive now.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to pile on.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just pile on more tax.
Yeah.
Walk us through though the budget. The actual implications or the effects that not just the PST but other things that they've done that the provincial government has put in this document, because I haven't read through it.
Who has? I mean, very few. Like that is one of the advantages of being in this job, is I get to actually pour over the numbers and geek out a little bit.
Well, out.
I'm a policy nerd at heart, right? It's a $13.3 billion deficit, which is the record-setting provincial debt, the largest deficit in the history of British Columbia, followed only by the last year, which is previously the largest ever record-setting. So we are setting records year after year now in terms of the amount of the size of the deficit. This was a bit of a mask-off moment, I think, for the government when it comes to their fiscal philosophy and their position. There really is no attempt to balance the budget. And this is a structural deficit, to be clear. When we talk about deficits, there's short-term deficits. Say, you've got with COVID, for example, a lot of businesses closed, a lot of work wasn't being done. You get that short-term, okay, things are closed, they're going to open back up. That's not a structural deficit. That's a short-term one because we know revenues are going to rebound. This is a structural deficit, meaning the government is permanently, for the long term, spending more than it's taking in. And that's a result of the spending choices of this government. They have really opened the checkbook and just started, they've maxed out the provincial credit card, so to speak. And the debt servicing payments are starting to tack up. You go down into into the bottom line, into the appendices of the budget on page, it's a 300 so page document. We're talking like page 200 here. And debt servicing costs are skyrocketing. I think we're going to be hitting something like $6 billion this year and going up to 8 or 9 over the course of the 3-year fiscal plan. And that, if just to put that in perspective, if debt servicing were its own government ministry, it would be the 3rd largest now. Last year it was the 4th largest. So we are now spending more on debt servicing than, for example, education and childcare, right? Or social assistance payments. It is starting to really add up. And where does that money go? Well, it goes to banks down south in the United States. That's just interest payments. That's not even the debt. That's just the interest. And these taxes that have been levied don't even begin to cover that amount. So my fear is that it's going to get worse because where are interest rates? They're high. We're not seeing any improvements in the province's credit rating either. And when the rating agencies, then the interest rates goes up because you got to pay more because you're a bad borrower, right? That's how credit scores work. That's, the government's credit score is not looking so hot right now.
In that document, was there any austerity? Was there any, there's not, I know they talked about reducing the civil service by 15,000 through attrition and retirement, which tells me.
So we've done some work on this at CFIB because we are, when we talk to small businesses and when we talk to small business owners, the number one thing they want to see is efficient government spending. That is if you asked a small business owner, how do we get this province back on track? They'd said, well, not one, let's focus on economic growth. 2, we got to be more, wise with our spending choices. When we look at how the government is spending, the cost of the public service has more than doubled since the current government has come into office. So just to give you an idea, we're talking from about 390,000 odd in terms of headcount to almost 600,000 people at the global public. Public service is the biggest and fastest growing employment industry in the province right now. So as I mentioned, about a 200,000 odd increase in civil servants. And this isn't just in core government. This is also at crown corporations, education, healthcare, some of them essential services. And let's be clear that, our small businesses value services like healthcare and education, but we got to be smart about how we do it. Well, back to your point, they say they're reducing the civil service by about 15,000 over the course of 3 years. Well, we've just grown it by 200,000. That's like a 3% reduction when we've more than doubled it. It's a drop in the bucket, really. And so it's a notional adjustment, I suppose. It's to, say that they're doing something, but I don't think this is a wholehearted attempt to get spending back on track.
Is there, and I don't want to dwell on the negative here, but it's very easy to dwell on the negative.
There's a lot of negative.
There's a lot of negative. And the issue is you can't, if you're only bringing in so much, I look at, gas prices have gone up. Okay. Massively. And there used to be a little thing, and this is one of my pet peeves. There used to be a little sticker on the pump that would tell you what was going to the provincial government, what was going to the federal government, where your taxes were. And the thing is, when I do watch the news and I see what we're paying for gas and what they're paying in Ontario or Manitoba for gas, it makes me crazy because every time the price of gas goes up, their take increases. right?
Yeah, I think in BC here it's a per cent per liter tax,
Yeah,
right?
no,
So
it's not a percentage.
no, just the GST, but the GST is tax on tax though.
Yes, it is tax on tax.
It is tax on tax.
But doesn't the provincial government isn't it a percentage? Maybe not wrong.
Well, here in Vancouver, you'd be paying, I think it's
paying
18.5 cents for TransLink tax.
Is it fixed?
It's fixed.
Okay.
Yes. So it is, yeah.
Okay, then I'm wrong.
Yeah, but no, the GST would scale.
Okay.
But but that is a popular, I think, misconception is, to be fair.
Okay. So the other thing is that like my property taxes are going up. Everything's going up. And every time I read something, I see that the government's settled with this union, with that union, and it's an increase. It's like, so where's that money going to come from?
Well, it's coming from small businesses. We're the ones paying for it. Like we had said that the general wage settlement needed to be competitive, and limited in order to avoid tax increases. Because then when usually the way this works is the BC Government Employees Union is the one that kicks off negotiations, and what they get, that goes to the rest of the public service. That forms the new baseline for all the other organizations that negotiate. And it ended up being quite a large settlement. I believe it's 12.5% compounded over 4 years, so 3% a year, right? And that is, I think, $4 billion is by the time it's fully realized in terms of annual costs. Well, that's a lot of spending. And when you look at the tax increases, well, there you go, right? Yeah. It's going to cause some structural difficulties for government spending. It already is, as we're seeing it show up in the budget. But back to the issue of gas prices. I'm glad you brought this up because we with the current global instability, we've did a flash survey of small businesses and asked them, are they seeing cost increases? Yes, they are. So you're getting hit by both ends. You've got the United States trade instability. You've got global conflicts driving up gas prices, increasing the cost of energy, and then you've got the government coming in and piling on new taxes and saying, here, hey, we're on our knees right now in the business committee, and then the premier's basically jumping off the top rope with a pile driver, said, hey, PST on professional services. Here's another one. Oh, it's the. I don't want to misname a bunch of wrestling moves right now. I'm not. But when I was I used to play the Nintendo wrestling, the WWE wrestling at my friend's house when my mom wouldn't let me have it. But gosh, it's hard. It's been 9 years of straws on the camel's back, right? And I thought, which one's going to be the one that breaks it? I don't know. Maybe this budget was. But here's the thing. Small businesses, what do they want for solutions? We're looking at the global energy cost increase. They want to see more effort for domestic energy supply in Canada. They want to say, small businesses are looking at the resources Canada has and they say, hey, we have the ability to do this ourselves. Why aren't we doing it yet? So 89% of BC small businesses say they'd like to see greater domestic capacity.
Is government even listening?
I mean, I was just in Victoria.
You work out of
Victoria.
So
I work out of Victoria, and CFIB met with government officials. So I can't say they're not listening. I think their ability to respond to the concerns that small businesses have is quite limited. They've handcuffed themselves with this massive deficit and reckless spending. Like just recently, as I mentioned, Coalition of Business Organizations, CFIB, Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, Urban Development Institute, many others got together and said, hey, government and business are not on the same page right now. These PST cost increases are going to hamstring economic growth in the province. So, and we delivered that message to government as well. And we said, look, there are big problems and we need to fix this. And time will tell.
The thing is though, that like I said this to you briefly before we started recording, is the reason I bring people such as yourself in here is because I want to see that somebody cares about what's going on.
Yeah.
Because there's times when I'm driving down Highway 99 going back home does anybody care?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you like there's projects that we're not going to be following through with. One of my, and the thing is that business needs these things. They need all of these things. We need a bridge or the tunnel needs to be. Like, there's things that we need with infrastructure. How are we going to pay for those things? How are we going to do that? How are we paying for the SkyTrain expansion? And does anybody, like, or is it just, sometimes I feel like I'm, the guy at the nuclear power plant in the Simpsons episode that's running around, the only person that thinks Homer's like nuts. So what does he do? Like, how does he have that job? Like, I'm lighting my hair on fire, screaming and hollering. I'm serious, Ryan, when I say that. When is enough? When is enough enough? And I just, and I know I sound like a crazy man now, but I don't know what the solution is. I don't know, like, and it's not like there's. I don't know what I expect to see. Is it rioting in the streets or what I think should happen? But I know things aren't real good here right now.
Yeah. I care about folks like someone we spoke to recently at CFIB. His name's Cy, and I'll leave his business name out of it because he doesn't know I'm sharing this story. But he told us, he says, look, my daughters are still in school. I'm trapped here. Right, I've got my business, but as soon as they're graduated, I'm going to Alberta. Right, he's fed up. He's already done. He's looking for a way out. My goal, I want Cy to stay here.
Yeah,
CFIB, like that's we're a national federated organization. We'll represent anyone from any province, but my goal is to get Cy to stay here because I want to make this a great place to do business where people love to be, and it's. Something, the issue that we're sounding the alarm about is something that we've called entrepreneurial drought. And so this is a measure that CFIB has taken, and it's 4 or more consecutive quarters of net negative small business formation. So for the last 5 straight quarters in BC, we've seen more businesses close or leave the province than have opened up shop. And that speaks to the situation that small business owners are facing. And what we hear from them is they don't feel respected. They don't feel like they're being rewarded for taking risks. It shouldn't be, I've spoken about the massive growth in size of government. It should not be easier to become a policy analyst with the government than it should be to start your own business.
100%.
I heard from a small business owner about the budget saying like they're losing employees to government jobs. The government is out competing them. And they can afford to do that because they're borrowing money to do it. When you don't have to, you don't have any limit on small businesses. You have to make money, right?
Yes.
That is, you have to run it. You got
to make payroll.
You got to make payroll. Government doesn't have that limitation, so they've blown everything out of the water, and it's sucking up our creative capacity. It's becoming this black hole of spending that we need to stem the tide on this. And so when I think about folks like Cy, I think about business owners who tell me that they're fed up. This is where the fight begins, and it has already started. To be clear, one of the nice things about CFIB is we go door to door talking to business owners.
That's how I found out about you.
We have over 200 district managers across the country that go door to door. And the virtue of this too is, there's a lot of ways to take survey data, but we know that at the end of every survey is a real person and a real business. And that helps us actually talk to small businesses and get a voice on the ground, because those voices matter. It's not Twitter bots. It's not lost in the postmodernist kind of social media sphere. It's like real people and their experiences on the ground.
Where the thing, I would imagine the reaction certainly wasn't muted from this budget, but is there? I don't want to be so negative.
Yeah, no,
I don't. Show me some light at the end of the tunnel, Ryan.
Yeah. So we've started a petition on this PST nonsense, and I think the thing is, like, small businesses are starting to speak up. Just on Tuesday, actually, Tuesday as of the recording of this, we launched a petition, and we've gotten hundreds of signatures already in the first 3 days of launching it. And that, I think, speaks to the fact that small business owners are finding their voice.
Well, so. I don't please paint they're finding their voice, but paint I'm going to tell you what to say. paint a picture where I can see some daylight. That meaning, because you know what, the sun might be shining out there, but the sun doesn't make your mortgage payment, doesn't pay your rent, doesn't pay for the gas, doesn't pay for the bananas that went up 10 cents a pound. It doesn't. So if the backbone of this country and the backbone of this province is small to medium-sized businesses. It's not big business can go wherever, okay? But you use that specific example of an individual that's kind of like stuck here. And that's the last thing that you want. I chose to come out here in 1994. And in 94, I had a very, I'm not going to say it wasn't cavalier. I had an attitude. Everything was kind of booming. It was going. And it was an attractive place for people. People wanted to come here. Now, maybe a lot of it had to do with Expo. I think that was in 86. But it's beautiful here. But beauty doesn't pay the bills. And it doesn't.
No,
right?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
I wish it did.
Yeah, it doesn't. And we're, I don't, and we had, now we've got, everything seems to be, and maybe I'm not, because we have a situation, a geopolitical situation that's going on right now. We continue, the provincial government here has kicked the can down the road with regards to our Indigenous people, First Nations. We've got a shitty budget that's come out. It's very difficult to feel optimistic about the future. And I would imagine that you, in dealing with your organization, in dealing with small to medium-sized businesses, like you said, you're trying to keep that individual here. There's a lot of, in my circle of friends that I know, that are thinking about moving to Washington State or moving to Alberta. And I can tell you this, I don't want my kids moving out of this province. I want them to stay here.
Mm-hmm. I'm so tempted to get into tax competitiveness, Washington State, but let me give you some hope first, and because we have seen some good things happen. I would not be doing my job if I didn't talk about the good things. And for one of those, it's the response to the tariff situation with the U.S. Canadians have really rallied around small businesses. That's something that we have seen in our numbers, is people are shopping local like never before. And we've been equipping our members with posters. You can put it up in your window, say, proudly Canadian owned, shop local. A significant number of our membership has seen people deliberately going out of their way to choose their business because they are locally owned or offer locally owned goods. And so we are seeing that shift. And business owners are pivoting their supply chains too. They're looking to Canadian suppliers, or they're trying to do business with other countries where we have free trade agreements, for example. So that shop local momentum has been like a silver lining to some of the chaos that small business owners have seen lately. On the other side, also, we have seen attitudinally governments shift towards cutting red tape. That is one thing you can do that's free, that doesn't require a budget, is get rid of some of the regulations and to be to offer some kind words to some government officials. They have been pivoting towards doing that. Internal trade is one of those issues. Talking about
provincial trade barriers.
Provincial trade barriers. It's been. In our history of fighting to lower interprovincial trade barriers, we've seen more momentum towards that in the last 6 months than the last 6 years. Just to talk about just how much energy has gone in towards that, because this is a crazy idea that it should not be easier to get a bottle of wine from France than from BC to Ontario, right? But it is.
It is.
I was actually, after my wife and I got engaged, we went to Spain and Portugal. We had a beautiful trip. And we were in Portugal, and we're like, oh, can we get some of this wine back home? And they said, oh, there's 2 countries in the world that we don't ship to, and one of them was Canada, because of how freaking impossible it is to navigate the liquor structure here. And so the good news is we've seen this. We went to government officials with this concept and said, hey, why don't we try this thing called mutual recognition? And it was like, okay, you may have different rules and standards. There's a million different rules and standards. We're not going to bother trying to go line by line and harmonizing them. We'll just say if it's good enough in Alberta or Nova Scotia, it's good enough here in BC. And what a unique concept that is, right? We can say, hey, we trust these other Canadian provinces to do their jobs. What a no-brainer. And say, we'll welcome these products as if they were approved here in British Columbia, and vice versa. And that was realized. We had the Canadian Mutual Recognition Agreement. So that's a silver lining there. If you want, and this is important for small business owners because it's not just about getting other stuff in, it's about getting our stuff to the rest of Canada, right? If you're a business, you generally want to grow. And so this will be huge for exporting goods and services to other provinces. And BC's Mutual Recognition Act does include services, which is a positive. What are the remaining barriers? Well, it's food, alcohol, and more generally labor as well. We need to make sure we do a better job getting food across provincial borders. You may have heard of a town called Lloydminster. That's got a border running right through it, right? Would you have believed that a while ago you would have needed a CFIA approved license to move it from one side of town to the other just because the provincial border's there? And suddenly the federal regulations kick in. You need...
Wow.
Yeah. So they launched a pilot project saying, hey, we'll have a waiver for this and actually, excuse some of the goods going across that border. Well, if we can do it for that, why can't we do it for all other provinces? And the sticking point here is the let's call it administrative inertia at the CFIB, CFIA. Sorry, there's still some. We've got CFIA and CFIB. Hey, would you look at that? But we need to do more work on this front.
Mm-hmm. So the issues. So how many? I'll ask you this: how many members do you have across Canada at CFIB?
Well, we just updated our national membership numbers. We've got 103,000 across Canada, and here in BC we've got 10,000.
Okay,
and growing.
And you do, and I'll say this: like I didn't know, Ryan, I didn't know about your organization until a month or so ago. I didn't know, and a friend of mine who happens to be a small businessman phoned me up and said, "Hey, you should talk to these guys." And how do you get the word out to small to medium sized businesses? Just by doing what you do, like banging on doors and saying, "Hey, listen, we're here for you," or
yeah, well, that is our number one way of getting the word out, is actually meeting business owners where they are, which is their business. If a lot of people are busy doing that. So we try and meet business owners where they're at. There's also, we do traditional media, we do social media, and that's kind of where we try and expand and, influence government by, making sure we're voicing small business owners' opinions. And then we also have our surveys, which are so incredibly important for making sure that we're taking the pulse of where, small businesses are at.
So I'm going to harp on this again, like the light there's some light at the end of the tunnel here. I know you advocate, but the question I'll ask you is that it's not just it's the population in general that needs to understand how important small to medium sized businesses are in this, not just this province, in this country. They're the economic engine that runs this thing here. Like whether or not it's not a and like you said, like it shouldn't be that a policy analyst is that you're competing with the government to hire a policy analyst, or a crown corporation is the biggest employer. Whatever, it shouldn't be, because that's our tax dollars. It is. And what's happening here is that it's not like we don't have issues with our healthcare, with our education. Just off the top of my head, with the infrastructure that we have in this province, in the lower mainland here, the infrastructure that we have a lack of it. We haven't had anything, and I'm not gonna shit on the new, I don't even know what it's called, the bridge. It's not called the Patella Bridge anymore. I don't know what it's called.
Stalawasan, I think. Yeah, Riverview.
Okay. But we replaced now I understand we replaced that bridge with a 4-lane, basically the same bridge.
4-lane bridge with a 4-lane bridge.
Yeah. I don't understand that. I don't. We still have, we have traffic congestion, which it affects businesses.
Mhm.
Like this does. It does. All of these things that even, the healthcare, our education. I read an article, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that the city or the Surrey School District is losing students. Okay, they don't have as many students as they had the year before, I guess.
Okay.
So they've decreased in enrollment, which means, guess what?
Decline
Decreased
funding.
That's right. And do you think there's any austerity? No. So people are leaving. That's all that tells me, is that people are leaving, and probably the people that are leaving are businesses that shouldn't be leaving, that should be staying here. What do we have to do to make this a business-friendly province?
Well, you mentioned the bridge. It starts by, recognizing the contributions of small businesses and not implementing union-only hiring policies for major capital infrastructure projects. That's something CFIB has been fighting against. The government uses something called community benefits agreements. Not a very great name because they don't necessarily benefit the community. What it means is only unions that have been designated by the government are allowed to work on those projects. So if you're a small contractor, for example, you've got to actually turn your workers over to the government-run hiring hall. They actually become government employees, and then they get leased out back to you while you're working on the bridge, right?
So I didn't know that.
So this is why projects like the Broadway SkyTrain are 2 years delayed and billions of dollars over budget, is because you get fewer bidders on the project at the initial stage. You're not having, this is basic supply and demand. More bidders, better price, right? You can offer a competitive price. And so the cost goes up. It's done cost plus, so any modifications, changes, add to the bill. You run into delays. And then, you look at, I'll go back to the Broadway SkyTrain, for example, the devastation that small businesses are facing along that corridor. It's a giant 2-story pit in the ground. And, there's like a puppy yoga that's, how are you supposed to run a puppy yoga with a giant hole in the ground and construction?
Or a camera shop.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And the government says, we put up signage. Well, yeah, okay. Have you seen some of the signs? It's like a little sandwich board next to a giant freaking crane, and you're supposed to go, oh yeah, there's a business behind that crane. Oh, if you don't see it, it doesn't exist. And it is, and so the government says, okay, well, we have billions of dollars to give to, select unions for this, to go over budget on this project, years delayed. And at the same time, they say, but we can't compensate you for the losses you've incurred. I spoke to someone who's, it's like, it took me 29 years to, save up to, buy a house, pay off the mortgage. And I just sold it again and went back to renting because I need to pay to keep my doors open. Like, that's the kind of financial impact this is having. So I realize I've gotten a little bit sidetracked here, but it is like, it starts by recognizing the contributions to small business, unionized or ununionized, right? But it needs to be open and fair for everyone, having these selective processes. And this is, these projects are funded by debt. I talked about the tax increases. I talked about the deficit. I talked about how we're having to pay for these interest costs on borrowing. It all comes back to the, full circle here, right? It is a pile of straws on the camel's back, and we're just waiting for the camel's back to break.
Is that what was that hiring? What did you said that they had to become provincial? The province had to hire them. Is that what happened with the waste treatment plant over in North Van too?
I don't think it was run under that model, no. But
that one's massively.
The corporation is called BC Infrastructure Benefits Incorporated. It's a Crown corporation. They own all the labor that works on the project, and then they signed basically an agreement with the Allied and Related Contracting Construction. Which is basically a coalition of the various select unions that are.
So we don't have competitive bids for these things.
No, not really. No, it's, on paper it's competitive, but it's like, I would say, you're tying your legs together as you get off the starting block, right? It's not really as competitive as it should be.
So if I'll say this, that if any of our listeners or viewers wanted to, your website has a plethora of information on, right? I would imagine.
Oh yes.
And you're all over the social media, but the question, I guess the issue or the bigger question is, once again, I'll harp on this. I'll say, is there anything short of a provincial election that will turn the tide, that will make a difference? And it's not, and I appreciate that you're advocating for small to medium-sized businesses, but you're also, in that advocacy is the entire population of British Columbia, because everybody relies on this. From the camera shop on Broadway, the bicycle shop. I know personally about what you're talking about, because we have gone to the camera shop on Broadway, and I drop my wife off and keep on driving around the block or whatever, and say, is it still there? Is it the bicycle shop?
I want to give a quick shout out to Euphoria Yoga out there. That spoke to them, and I heard their story. Their husband and wife team working multiple jobs just to keep the doors open. Nigel at Main Street Brewery, he's also a recent CFIB member, and he's experienced some difficulties from that construction.
You mentioned I think the onerous structure of the taxation here, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, because I'm recalling the conversation that we had before we went on. Was it a brewery that was having? Was it a brewery that you were talking about that was having an issue with alcohol sales or something?
Yeah, well, breweries are facing, especially small breweries, are facing a difficult time right now. You look at the macroscopic trends of the number of people drinking right now, and that's not necessarily growing either. And they also have a markup, a taxation structure per liter, where you pay a volume-based tax, and that's a ladder tax. So the more you grow, right, if you're trying to grow, the more tax you pay, and that hurts them. And then also you've got the confusing markup structure of in different provinces, right? So we just spoke about interprovincial trade. You want to grow, you want to sell in other places. That's also difficult, even to just get your stuff on the shelf. We wrote a letter to the premier not too long ago as saying, hey, look, you've taken U.S. alcohol off the shelves. You should replace that with local products, right? And that wasn't done. So, these are, for reasons unbeknownst to me, but it seems like a no-brainer, right? So, small breweries are
hard could that be?
Oh, gosh, right? I don't know. But I guess, I spoke about a bureaucratic inertia, right? Perhaps someone somewhere thought it would have just been too difficult. But
explain to me this, okay? Why do we still have the BC liquor stores? Why? I don't understand that one. They went on strike, right? A little while ago.
As part of the so we talked about the big wage settlement with that their BC government employees union, BCGEU, so that they were on strike as part of the BCGEU strike for those contract negotiations, and the government caved and gave them the wage settlement they were asking for, 3% a year for 4 years. So
explain this to me, Ryan. And the other thing, I don't drink, but I do have family members that drink, and how can a private liquor store survive selling liquor cheaper than the BC liquor store?
That is a pretty good question. I think it boils down to geographic licensing and scarcity, right? And for the government would tell you they need to run the liquor stores because it's revenue to the province, but even that's starting to decline, right? It used to be that BC Liquor was pulling in over $1 billion a year, and they actually have that going sub-billion now into the future. So there's another source of taxpayer revenue that's starting to disappear and dry up.
Well, even in the land transfer tax, there's no real estate being sold. And that was a gouge anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That was a shocker when I bought my first house. I didn't know anything about the land transfer. About that.
You ever hear that old quote about bankruptcy? And they asked the guy, "How did you go bankrupt?" And he said, "Well, slowly, and then all at once." Right? That's what I fear is happening in the province. It's happening slowly, but I can see the all at once coming down the pipeline here.
And we have to I'm you can tell I'm perplexed and frustrated with this, because I pay attention, and the reason that I'm talking to you, I like talking to younger individuals that give a shit, that are advocating, that are doing something about this. And I think that the only solution actually is advocacy, which you guys are doing. And people should be screaming from the streets and saying, listen, you know what? This isn't sustainable.
Yeah.
It's not, we can't continue.
You mentioned, change, right? And how does change come about? Well, one thing we're doing is I mentioned already our petitions that we're signing. First of all, you mentioned our website. You can go online, check out the CFIB website, cfib.ca, and look at some of our petitions. They're there for you to sign. We deliver those to government saying, here's the amount of people that are fed up with, this policy or yours. One of them is the cost of paid sick days on employers. That's been a huge burden, actually one of the largest payroll cost increases that small businesses have had to face in recent years. Now we're focusing on rolling back this PST hike. That is going to be our big fight for the next year, and it seems to be that people are alive and aware of it, and they're fed up. The last time a big tax change like this happened was the HST budget under Gordon Campbell. We've seen some polling from innovative research that says this is the most unpopular budget since the Gordon Campbell HST budget, and that took down the premier.
Yeah.
So, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not going to make any predictions, but I would be very careful about continuing to download costs onto small businesses like the current government is doing.
We can't sustain it. It can't be. It's not sustainable. In saying that, Ryan, I'd like to wrap it up by reiterate what CFIB is, and if there are any of our listeners or watching this wanted to get involved, what you guys do, you advocate, but it's better to hear it from you.
Yeah.
What you do, and reiterate what you're doing in Victoria too.
Well, thank you. CFIB is Canada's largest small business advocacy organization. We are the voice of small business, and we go door to door recruiting and talking to small businesses to make sure that their voices are heard with government. We fight for the little guy. We are in BC. Our average number of employees is about 15 employees for a small business. So we're representing the voices and the concerns of small businesses to government, the federal government, the provincial government, your local government, and we make sure that they have a chance to live and thrive here. And my vision for BC is that we make this the best province to do business in Canada, and that's what we're going to keep fighting for.
Well, listen, Ryan, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you sharing it, coming here on a Sunday afternoon. I really do appreciate you coming to Ship of Fools, where wit meets wisdom. I encourage anybody that's listening or watching to subscribe, and you'll see this episode come out, and watch us on our social media channels. And I can't say how happy I am to see a young fellow like yourself who's standing up and advocating for small to medium-sized businesses here in British Columbia. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Stephen.
Right on.
You may be asking yourself, what's any of this got to do with me? Absolutely nothing. Until next time.